The purpose of this particular session is to reflect on what we've heard and learned today. And I've asked two old friends, colleagues, Scarlett Varga from Bruegel and the Brussels Binder, and Sherine Ghoneim from the Economic Research Forum in Egypt, to share with us what they heard, what they learned, what they'd like us to remember from today. So why don't we start with you, Scarlett? I have you on my right in the screen.
Sure. Thank you so much.
And I invite anybody else who wants to add your lessons, your takeaways, to share them on the chat. But also, before we finish the session, I'll let anybody who wants to join with video and audio as well to communicate. So go ahead, Scarlett. I interrupted you.
No, not at all. So thank you so much, Enrique. As I joined the choir of the people who thanked you today 10 million times, because it's really worth what we are doing here. So just to follow up on what you were saying, Sherine and I were asked to basically stalk speakers today and just listen in on all the sessions and try to basically narrow down a few ideas that we would like you or we plan to take away from this day. And I think Sherine will agree with me, it's not an easy task to do, also because there were just so many interesting ideas shared and in the way they were done. We had a great keynote as well. But I tried basically, what I tried to do is, I took away some key messages from what Anne-Marie shared with us at the beginning. And then as I was going through the sessions, I tried to match different feedbacks to those big headlines or topics. And not to take too much time, I would choose only two of these main messages. The first one is more of a generic one. And I think that whatever we want to call ourselves in the future, after this big change, whether it's Change Hub or, as she was saying, public problem-solving organizations, we have to understand how we can stand out still. And I think that for me, the one big message is that ideas, thinking, and expertise is still at the core of what we are trying to do. And I think this is an important message because when crises happen, we have seen that with Brexit, with the Greek crisis, and not just with economic crises, but all kinds of, like now with the pandemic, that expertise is put into question for some reason. I think it's quite illogical for us to understand, but it is. But I think that this crisis that we are living now, the pandemic, and this was a message that I took from a session, the pandemic has showed us again that expertise and experts matter. And those countries who rely on them, they did better. And this is not to, take any, comment or criticize any of the countries that have not, because we're talking about suffering. But I think that these conclusions have to be made and they have to be taken forward. And related to this, actually, there was just a point that made me, look at things very positively, because I work in development and fundraising. And there was, in one of the sessions, there was a comment saying that donors are becoming much more flexible and expectations are much more realistic given the crisis. And I was somewhat surprised, but in the end, I must say that yes, it's true partially. And I am hoping that this will actually mean, and this refers again back to what Anne-Marie was saying, that this will actually mean that we have more space for experimentation, which is expected of us in order to find new solutions for the future. Because I don't think that we can do it without, sometimes failing, and we need support, we need funding and just general support for that. So this would be the first point. The second point is something that is very close to my heart and is related to what Enrique was saying. I'm also a co-founder of the Brussels Binder. And I do think about and care about diversity, not just when it comes to men and women, but diversity in general. At least I'm trying to learn more about it, and not that I'm an expert at all. And what really marked me is how Anne-Marie started. One of her points is saying that instead of thinking how many people we include, we should think about how many, or worry about how many people we exclude while we do our job. And I think this is true when it comes to audiences in general, because we talked a lot about target audiences these days, because of course our impact is visible there. But it's very much, and our credibility is visible there, but it's very much reflecting also on staff and who we work with internally in our organizations and externally. And there has been a lot of, I would say, very positive discussion on how we should involve more, minorities, the young generation. Actually, this was a point that surprised me a bit, I must say, that many of the participants voiced a certain concern on how we should attract more young people, while a lot of young potential is available and not yet utilized. I mean, unemployment between the young is the highest, especially during crisis periods. So I think that this is really showcasing a mismatch between what is on demand and what is on offer. And we can definitely help, not just by showing good practice, but writing about this and doing more on this issue. So I think this is what I would really highlight. And we are doing a lot inside of our organizations to do this better when it comes to hiring practices. But I think that maybe the final word or the final takeaway is, and this has been again mentioned in the parallel sessions, when asked what has changed in this period and what has been more innovatively done. And one of the conclusions by a participant was that because they aimed to and they managed to increase diversity, that led to a more diverse and innovative output, which stood the ground in the crisis. I think this is a beautiful way to kind of think about diversity in the future. And I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Scarlett. Sherine, do you want to go next?
Sure. Well, thank you, Scarlett. And again, Kiki, always lovely to be with you. I would actually like to do two things. One is that I really can't agree more with some of the key brought to our attention, the need to go beyond policy and looking into public problem solving approaches, the need to develop new ways of thinking, the need to look closely into moving beyond our traditional think tank role and looking into some kind of guidance through adopting measures like a theory of change. So I really can't agree more with some of the key aspects that have been brought forward. And I felt very strongly that it was almost a call, an inspiration to push the boundaries. I kept thinking about what's been happening, and I would actually go with what's been happening over the last year with the pandemic, that it's more of a systemic shock that has allowed for fantastic potential. And what we're hearing all around is that there is more than ever before the need to look into what we're doing, how we're doing it, and first and foremost, why we're doing it. We do need that clarity of vision, that clarity of purpose more than ever before. And reflecting on, at ERF, we've had serious internal and external shocks because of the pandemic. It has affected a lot of the ways we're thinking about things, how we're generating research versus the need for immediate expertise and policy insight, how we are as an institution dealing with a number of things. And to sum them up in some of the highlights relating also to what has been mentioned in the parallel session is that there seems to be a shift in the way we're all thinking about things. There needs to be, I see the change from talking institutional sustainability to need to think about more about resilience. There's a lot that's been learned through the pandemic in terms of institutionally what needs to be done. There needs to be a shift from looking into innovative ways of doing things, into employing more and more and more creativity, more flexibility, and that's been brought up in a couple of the parallel sessions as well. There needs even to be an acknowledgement in terms of how we look at the relations with people, the connectivity with people, the hiring processes at the institutional level. We no longer hear words like empowering. We are more hearing things like nurturing, like connecting, like seeing more change take into in light of growth, what needs to be done by way of growth. So reflecting from an exercise that we've done at ERF, and where we actually looked into the purpose, revisiting the purpose, revisiting the relationship with people, be it internally staff, what we need to do to nurture that. We had we had actually, the pandemic has, COVID-19 has hit us sharply, even in with our staff, and we lost our finance director, and that was a serious institutional shock. But that allowed us also to look into how we are looking after our people. We looked into the modalities over the year in terms of how we design the projects differently, how the partnerships are looked upon differently, the roles of the donors versus what we're doing, encompassing more multidisciplinary aspects, the boundaries that we used to have. It's almost like a call to extend and embrace different modalities. We employed, all of us, we employed different platforms in terms of reaching out to people towards further participation. And it's almost like at the end of the day, the pandemic came across to knock onto more serious potential, to allow us to look into exactly this. What are we doing? How are we doing it? And why? Why, honestly, why are we doing it? Are we doing it to just extend knowledge in a particular field? And that will take us back to Anne-Marie's intervention at the beginning, and saying, what roles and how can we complement and how can we extend, really, looking at the world from a different lens. So it just feels that the change is so strong beyond a change. It feels like trying to find our way in white waters where we don't know where we're heading, where we're going. We can't hear each other. But at the end of the day, unless we're guided by very clear vision of thriving, of survival, of very clear values, very clear understanding of how things need to be done, that's exactly what's going to take us forward. And that's why I've always been keen on a lot of the thinking that Kiki brings into that, and the partnership that this attracts, because it's that openness to learning, it's that openness to setting a different boundary, to moving forward, seeing what it's like to really move our agenda forward. And with that, I come to an end.
Thank you, Sherine, and thank you, Scarlett. Let me add a question, and also an invitation to others in the audience to join us. This is a comment. So it's happened. I feel that over the year, some of us have been using a lot of platforms to connect, right? Whether it's Hypo, whether it's Zoom or WebEx or Hopin, etc., etc. And some organizations, some individuals have been flexible about that, right? They've used whatever is necessary to reach that audience that they wanted to reach. But some organizations, especially the larger ones, the ones that have the most resources, actually have been quite limited in their flexibility. They use WebEx, or they use Zoom, or they use Teams because that's what the organization has bought into. And so it sort of feels that a lot of this demand for flexibility, demand for new business models, demand for being open and inviting of new generations with new ways of thinking, new ways of connecting is great, but that still places a huge challenge on organizations, and they're structured and they're formal. They have hierarchies and processes. So that's something I take from today. I don't know the answer, right? But I think that we need to think really hard about how to marry that demand for change at the organization level and the ability that organizations have to actually change. Certainly not with the speed that this conversation suggests. Some think tanks should be changing. That's kind of reflection I take with me. As I said, I don't necessarily need an answer, but I hope we can collectively think about it. I don't know, Paul, you wanted to add something to the conversation, to the lessons that Scarlett and Sherine had shared, or you want to share something, some lessons or takeaways for your own? Thank you for joining us.
That we've all heard is that it's important for think tanks or change hubs to continue to be diverse, diverse in terms of age and diverse in terms of education and background, and of course ethnicities, if that is a factor, in order to come up with the kinds of solutions that are intersectional and also global and multicultural. And those organizations that are able to do that with the kind of dexterity and flexibility would tend, in my view, to be more relevant than those who, as we've heard before, are somewhat enclosed, elite, and exclusive. And so these are some of the things that I've heard from Scarlett and also others who have spoken today. And I think this has been a very, very productive kind of conversation to spur us to move in those directions.
Thanks so much for this first day of the conference. It was very inspiring. And I wanted to go back to the keynote speech by Anne-Marie. And one thing that Scarlett offered as an observation when you said that ideas and research will stay the same. And I wanted to say, I think, though, that the methodology that Anne-Marie described, that involves lots of, first-hand conversations with stakeholders, as part of research, I think this requires new competencies as well, in the sense of process design, in the sense of collaborative facilitation, in the sense of, ethnographic interviews, design thinking, etc. So I think there's so many. So if we really, try to take this seriously, what she described as the work of a change hub, I think yes, expertise will still stay relevant. But it's not, us reading the news and, following the debate and then writing it up and then putting it online. It's not, this one-way channel. Of course, it's a bit more complex, I know. So this is deliberately simplified, but I think it's much more iterative. It's much more collaborative, co-creative. And this really requires different skills than what we learn at university. Most often, in most countries, you don't learn these skills at university. So I think that think tanks have to, if we want to go down that road of the change hub, and I very much identify with what Anne-Marie described as her vision, then we really have to invest heavily in these skills and in these structures and mindsets, because it's not us as experts lecturing the public anymore, but it's us listening to the public to bring it together with other stakeholders and create a platform. And I know that for many think tanks, being a platform doesn't sound as attractive as being or even a facilitator doesn't sound as attractive as, pushing our own ideas, our own knowledge to the public. So I think it's really a shift in mindset, a shift in skills, and a shift in formats, products that is needed, that if we really want to go down that route.
Thank you so much. Just to reply very briefly to what Claire highlighted, indeed, I totally agree, and I think this is why I wanted to highlight, but I don't think I did it necessarily very well. The need for more experimentation, and I think this is something that we have discussed actually when we first met in person, Claire.
Yes.
In the event, basically we at that time I think we were taking it more from a fundraising angle, but experimentation means also, as I said, failing sometimes. So we need to have the framework to be able to go and experiment on certain ideas, certain practices, in order to be able to fail sometimes and to succeed once. So I think this is something that's missing. the second point I wanted to make is, and also what was discussed in the sessions, is a bit how we think about interaction between think tanks. Because we talk a lot about collaboration and let's be, let's work together, let's do it, and so on. But I think it's interesting to look at it from the other side. What does competition between think tanks mean, and how much do we really need it? Because we talked about rankings and so on. I mean, this is a whole open discussion. But what if we thought about the future of the think tank scene more as, the Finnish or the Swedish think about education system? That, there's no Harvard or there's no like the best school in town or the best university in the region, but the objective is for all of them to be good. And for all of them, everybody who is in this sector, in this arena, to do well for our society to go on. And I think that what Anne-Marie was saying, that now it's a moment of change after, 100 years or you name it, how many. Maybe this is, another moment for us to think a bit like this outside of the box, like not just like, how can I be the best and how can I succeed over everyone? But really, how can we do it, in a way to push the standards up on all levels? Just another idea.
I wonder if we can learn here. I know that in the startup scene, there is this concept of red versus blue ocean, like where we could approach our work more as collaborative in the blue version, because there's no blood spread because of any sharks, and then there's this red ocean concept where it's like very competitive, live or die. And I think maybe we can learn from them and like look more into those concepts, because the private sector is much more competitive even than ours, I think.
Sure.
Thank you. Hans, I don't know, Hans, you want to join, but you've raised an issue that I do think, at least, that while he's going to join, but experimentation might be. I'll let him raise his issue, his comment. I was also reminded that one of the sessions we had was on democratization and the role think tanks play in those processes. But in some parts of the world, we're seeing a kind of a return to undemocratic governments. And that's where networks, that's where the health of the whole system or the whole community is very important. And so it might be that the role of think tanks, the role of supporters of think tanks in those contexts is not necessarily to influence policy or bring about change, but to protect that infrastructure, to protect those people and those organizations that you require for change in the future. And of course, it brings to mind a conversation that we were having with Karen and Julia, and it's about trying not to be disconnected from your locality, right? From the context in which you operate, because some think tanks might find it very easy to be, connected to everybody, right? Reaching everybody online, and that's attractive, that's interesting, that's fun, but you have to be careful you do not disconnect from where you are, the place where you are, and what is relevant. Sherine, do you want to say something beforehand?
Yeah, I just wanted to just say one other aspect of what's been happening, the change that's been happening recently in terms of collaboration versus competition among think tanks. What we found recently as well is that, I spent quite a number of years with the Global Development Network trying to nurture sort of cross-region relationships and projects and the rest of it. And it always seemed to be a very supply-driven. What we've seen from ERF this last year is that with new emerging topics like future of work, for the first time, there is a collaboration between a network in the Middle East with a network with CPEC, in Latin America, to talk about future of work and what can we learn and how can, what are the lessons learned and what can we look into together. Similarly, for the first time, we're talking about a joint project, again, by way of collaboration with the African Economic Research Consortium because of a new agenda item coming up on board with digital transformation. So the more we push the boundaries multidisciplinary, the more we're sensitive and flexible to adjusting to demand the more we find potential for collaboration with different think tanks and networks.
Thank you. Hans, what do you think about this change of approach? Or is it about horses for courses, and there is a role for different types of organizations and different types of approaches?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's great to experiment and do new things, and to find new models and integrate. But it just, as I said in my comment, I mean, I've been in the last half year, because I'm focused on the Caucasus. I ran a 3-country institution, so something like the Karabakh conflict was something that I've written about in part, that I followed very closely, where I talked to a lot of people. And there, the voice of a, if you will, aloof think tank. Yeah, Lawrence Burrs at Chatham House, who also does other things, of course, but Tom DeVal at Carnegie Endowment, who doesn't really do many other things. That's a very, very classical think tank role. And in that environment that gets entirely overheated on social media, and where former ambassadors are starting somehow to be dragged into this entire thing as well, I think the very boring think tank role of actually knowing first knowing what happened in 1987 and what happened in 1990 and how exactly these things continued and what happened at a particular point was absolutely essential. Because the policymakers themselves in the West, they're relatively, I mean, if they've just been on the job or on that desk for 5 years, they simply do not have the depth on these particular things. So again, that's not to say that there isn't a space and that social media changes a lot of that, and we're content providers and all of this in various ways. But in particular, deep crisis situations, precisely to contrast from the crazy noise, I think think tanks doing very classical things can be incredibly valuable.
Fantastic. I think that's it's an excellent way of reminding us of the various tensions that think tanks and this field faces. And Julia Pomares sort of put it to Karen at RUSI, saying, how does RUSI balance the tradition it has of 190 years with the need to adapt and to change and to respond to its context and to its future, and it's certainly not an easy thing to do, but at least we have to. I think we all agree we have to be open to different approaches, to greater diversity and inclusion, to, as you said, about who we exclude from the conversation and the process, and what we do that is useful, and to sort of paraphrase something that our friend Peter da Costa said, we have to stop doing what we think is clever and start doing what is actually necessary. And in certain contexts, some things will be necessary, and in other contexts, other things will be necessary. So I want to bring this day to an end, the sort of formal part of this conversation. And thank you, all of you who have participated, those who were in the program, as well as those who've joined us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. It was a great start.
Thanks to all of you. Pleasure.